Croeso, Shwmai. Thank you to Aled and Sophie there for giving me this opportunity to inanely witter at you for an hour and a half. As Aled said, my name's John Williams. Couple of sort of other thank yous. I've got to thank Gareth there. Gareth's my mate, he's come along to support me, but he also read my MA thesis, from which this is partly derived. And if you've got nothing else to do next Tuesday morning, I'm doing the follow-on to this, which is a little bit more interesting, he says, not selling this one very well, which is about the fallout from Mametz wood, which was the criticism and the denigration of the 38th Welsh Division, predominantly by, I'm no nationalist, but by English generals and some of the British press, which portrayed them as cowards and having run away. And that became something of a cause célèbre after the war. So the next talk, if you're able to come, looks into that in some detail. It's based on my MA thesis, and it looks at why did that happen. We'll touch on it a little bit through this. So that's the first thing. Other thing I think perhaps a couple of things I should mention. Probably the best place to do this talk is there. And I have Richard. Hello Richard, how are you?
I'm alright, sorry to interrupt you.
You're not?
Afternoon everybody, sorry for my rush.
If you want a coffee, ask Alan, he'll sort you out quietly whilst I witter on. I've only just started, so you're okay. Thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. So if you're going to do it there. But the other place, if you're going to do it in Ponty, is here. Because as you know, this park, the Memorial Park, was created to memorialise those that made the ultimate sacrifice in the First World War. So, and we'll talk about some of those people as we go through this talk. So that's that. And the final, I suppose, thank you in a very sad way, is, and you may not have heard of this guy, you might have, is Professor Christopher Williams. He was in the university in Cardiff. He passed away just last week, very suddenly. He was in University of Cork. And yeah, very suddenly he passed away. And his article, The Question of Legitimate Pride, was really the spur for me to look at this, to look at Mametz wood, and it was the basis of my what I wanted to do for my thesis. Yeah, I'm sad to say I never got to meet the bloke. He actually was a supervisor, one of my colleagues from university who's doing his PhD. Yeah. So that's a sadness, but great historian of Wales. So yeah. So on that sad note, welcome. So there's the memorial. Can I ask, has anybody been there? Yeah, well, really rad. Anybody got any relatives that they know of that may have fought there? And did they get through?
No.
No.
When the Egypt did.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, well, I've got some photos which we will take through. It's nice to know you see where some people are very, very passionate. I've done this talk to the Western Front Association, and lots of people in the room had relatives who fought there. So, yeah. Mametz wood isn't a battle, okay? I will probably get caught out and have to pay a fine and call it a battle during this talk. It's a series of engagements at Mametz wood. The powers that be didn't feel that it merited being a battle, so it's actually one phase of the Battle of Albert, which commenced on the 1st of July 1916 and ended on the 13th of July 1916. It was followed then by the Battle of Byzantine Ridge, and Mametz wood is all about preparation for that second phase of the Somme offensive. That's a great quote from Robin Barlow, and the more I think about it, the more I'm starting to disagree with it as time goes by. There was a historian on Twitter, I do a fair bit on Twitter, who quoted this. She runs a battlefield guiding company, and she actually quoted this, but she quoted it to Wales Online. Wales Online said, so I had to correct her. But it's a very good book, Wales in World War I, Robin Barlow's book. The name of Mametz wood, perhaps like those of Aberfan or Sengennydd, is embedded deep in the Welsh psyche, immediately conjuring up images of needless loss of life, bravery, chaos, and self-sacrifice. I don't know whether I agree with him so much now. Aberfan, yes. I think if you took a straw poll of the population of Wales, 99% would say we're Sgwrs. And of the remaining 1% that knows where it is, I reckon about half of them wouldn't know about the 1930 mining disaster. And I think now similarly with Mametz Wood. 20 years ago maybe, 30 years ago, but as generations have moved on, I'm not entirely certain that it's not taught in schools. And truth be told, I only first came on it about 5 years ago when I visited Mametz Wood with the school, totally by chance. But it's the most well-known, if you like, of the Welsh actions during the First World War. And most people talk about the Welsh experience of the First World War, point to Mametz Wood. But as anybody knows, if you've done any reading of it, it's more than that. More people joined up before the 38th Welsh Division was created. Welshmen were already going to the colours. Welsh regiments fought in Gallipoli, in Salonika, Mesopotamia, and everywhere else. But for some reason, and I think, as I touched on at the start about the fallout from the engagement, that's why Mametz Wood has got this totemic place in Welsh history and Welsh military history. And of course, Cardiff Royal Infirmary had Mametz Ward. People put money towards it, and there are other places around Wales that bear the name. Now we'll come on to that a bit later on. Yeah. So, he is my hero. David Lloyd George. Probably the most famous Welsh politician, I would argue, but he's Chancellor of the Exchequer. So when war breaks out on the 4th of August, he's Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he spends basically the first few weeks of the war preparing Great Britain and its empire to fight the war to the plan that had been drawn up before the war. And that plan was this: we'll let French soldiers die, and we'll let the Russians die. Our navy will blockade Germany, and we'll supply the pound notes. So Britain was not prepared, really, to fight the First World War, although it thought it was. The plan was, we'll let them do the dying, we'll do the sailing and the blockading, and it'll be our pound notes that will pay for the equipment that they need to fight. Problem was that a guy called Henry Wilson ends up as a field marshal. You've probably heard of him. He was a general at the time, great Francophile. He'd been working with the French in the years preceding the First World War, and he'd come up with a plan that the British Expeditionary Force would go to France. So, they knew Germany was coming. It was no great secret. But the British High Command hadn't bothered really to tell the politicians that that's what they were going to do, although they probably did know. So the British Expeditionary Force is shipped off to France at the beginning of the war. Lloyd George's view on the war was very important to the public because he'd been against the war in South Africa, the Boer War in 1900. He was vilified for it. He was not a pacifist, he was a defensist. That's the way he termed himself. But he was vilified, he was despised by the British High Command because of his stance around the Boer War. He became, I think it was Cecil Harmsworth, the Liberal politician, said that he was at the time the most hated man in Britain. And he's conflicted. In his diary, there's a diary entry which is dated the 3rd of August, funnily enough, day before war is declared, before the lights go out, as Sir Edward Grey said. He says, "I am moving through a nightmare world these days. I have fought hard for peace and succeeded so far in keeping the cabinet out of it. But I am driven to the conclusion that if the small nationality of Belgium is attacked by Germany, all my traditions and even prejudices will be engaged on the side of war. I am filled with horror at the prospect. I am even more horrified that I should ever appear to have a share in it, but I must bear my share of the ghastly burden. though it scorches my flesh to do so. So he is really conflicted about his support for the war, up to literally the moment before he gives this speech. It's his Queen's Hall speech, one of his most famous ones, and it's the one where he talks about the Prussian road hog driving down the roads of Europe and crushing all. And he talks about his famous quote, the 5'5" nations. And of course, he uses his own little cartoons of the day of Lloyd George, who was, funnily enough, 5'5" tall, nose to chest with caricatures of the Kaiser, who was 6'1", 6'2". So the speech is long and it's ranging, but this is for our purposes, this is the paragraph. I should like to see a Welsh army in the field. I should like to see the race who faced the Normans for hundreds of years in their struggle for freedom, the race that helped to win the Battle of Crecy, the race that fought for a generation under Glendower against the greatest captain in Europe. I should like to see that race give a good taste of its quality in this struggle in Europe, and they're going to do it. And everybody cheered. All the Welsh diaspora, the Queen's Hall in London, to whom it was directed, they all cheer. There's a recruiting booth over in the corner, and all the young men are all off that way, and they're all signing up. What becomes known as Lloyd George's Welsh Army. The reason he gives the speech, and he gives it in these terms, is because he was one of the few people at the time that thought this war was going to be a long one. I mean, you know, it was in Germany. It was it'll be over by the time the autumn leaves fall. In Britain and the Empire, it'll be over by Christmas. Lloyd George, Kitchener, and a few others were more realistic. They knew they were in for the long haul. It was going to cost in lives, and it was going to cost in pounds as well. And this was aimed at, as I said, the Welsh diaspora, but also Welsh nonconformists. As I'm sure you know, nonconformism was linked to pacifist movement, not entirely. He was a nonconformist, but he was a defensist as opposed to a pacifist. And Wales and the British Army didn't have a very good relationship at the time. In 1913, barely 1.3% of the British Army were Welsh. Because of nonconformism, that was one reason people didn't go into the British Army. There was ostracism within Welsh Valley communities and rural communities to those that served in the British Army. There was also better opportunities to earn money in Civvy Street, in the mines, in the docks, and places like that. So Wales was not that well known for its commitment, shall we say, to the British Army, which provided a few problems when we come up to the creation of the 38th Welsh Division. And that speech is what triggered it. There's a meeting the next day in 11 Downing Street. Some of the great and the good are called, and then eventually, after a couple of days, a National Executive Committee is created in Cardiff, in the City Hall there, and Lord Plymouth is made the chair, and as I say, great and good aldermen and some military people with a Welsh background are co-opted on there. And Lloyd George does have a bit of a fight with Kitchener over this, who is by this point is Minister of War. Just jumping back a step with Wales as well, with the Welsh and the British Army, is the language issue as well. Welsh wasn't recognised within the British Army. It wasn't allowed to be spoken in the British Army. Although there were no real rules to say it wasn't, it was frowned upon. And so at the time, believe it or not, in 1913, 50% of the Welsh population spoke Welsh. 42%, funny enough, Christopher Williams' figures, if I remember right, 42% were bilingual, 8% were monoglot Welsh. But you weren't allowed to speak Welsh, you weren't allowed to write home in Welsh. So again, a lot of Welsh speakers, and particularly within the nonconformist community, that was another reason they didn't want to be in the British Army. So the plea from Lloyd George and his Welsh Army is a Welsh-raised army corps, officered by Welsh officers. That might be a bit of a problem if you haven't got a lot of Welshmen in the British Army, but we'll come to that in a minute, where the language could be spoken as well. And at the time, again, nonconformist chaplains were not allowed in the British Army. And Lloyd George, famously in Asquith's diaries and letters to his girlfriend Venetia Stanley, he recounts how there is an amazing bust-up in Cabinet where Lloyd George goes after Kitchener in some fine style about the language, because he says, you know, you've got East End, we've got to talk like East End Barrow boys to be able to join this, we can't speak our own language. And he says, and we've got soldiers coming from the from India who can speak whatever, I think he used the word gibberish, but I'm not sure, whatever gibberish they want to, but Welshmen are not allowed to speak their own language, so they can have their own, and that was the argument. The Indian regiments could have their own priests, they were speaking their own languages, not just one language, but you won't allow proud Welshmen to join the British Army and speak their language. And Kitchener lost. Kitchener lost the battle because he knew he had, you know, a population of about 500,000, and that was what Lloyd George's concern was, to get the Welsh population involved in the war, because he knew it was going to be a long war, and we would need, or I'm not going to say Gary Sheffield would slap me for that, they would need as many bodies, probably not the right word, but you know what I mean, to fight the war. As I mentioned, before this, there were Kitchener's Court of Arms, Your Country Needs You, Welshmen were joining up, that's fair to say, right across the board. There is some academic papers which will say that, you know, Wales didn't pull its weight in the First World War. Absolute nonsense. Per capita, Wales had more recruits into the British Army than the other three nations. A lot more than Ireland. Well, Ireland was a particularly contentious issue at the time. So, you know, anybody suggesting that Wales wasn't pulling its weight, historically wrong. So, recruiting the 38th. I'll have to read these now. I'm not going to use my pointer because I know if I touch it, the screen will move. We'll go over. But anyway, top right, we've got that's the 7th, that's 2nd North Wales Battalion, Royal Welsh Fusiliers, in February 1915, up in Llandudno. They joined the 38th Welsh Division in April of 1915. What have we got there? I think that's 10th South Wales Borders in Winchester, later in 1915 when they moved south. That's Lieutenant, I don't know which one is Lieutenant Brayshaw, I think that's Lieutenant Brayshaw there. And the first 10 recruits of the 16th Welsh Cardiff City Battalion on the beach, or the seafront at Porthcawl, sometime in September 1914. So literally not long after Lloyd George's Queen's Hall speech. And that's elements of the 38th parading on the seafront in Rhyl in 1915. Lloyd George, it wasn't just about Wales and its place in martial history. It's also about economics, because all the seaside resorts around Wales were all bidding to house battalions. Okay, and of course the money flows in from central government. Most of them are up north, so Rhyl, Colwyn Bay, and all up around there, which had issues for actual training. The infantry battalions were up there. So, for example, the Signals Detachment and Royal Engineers. Anybody care to hazard a guess where in Wales they decided to put those? About as far as you can get from North Wales. Abergavenny. Bailey Park, Abergavenny had the Signals Detachment, and if you know Abergavenny, the Castle Meadows down by the river, that's where the Royal Engineers were digging trenches and practicing building bridges. And yeah, there's some good newspaper stuff and diary stuff for commanding officers going down and reviewing them. So they are separated and they are split. You've probably heard of Brethren Lewid, the brown, the chocolate soldiers, the uniform. They thought, what we'll do is we'll make Welsh wool, we'll make uniforms for the Welsh Army Corps. It didn't go down very well. The dye was not good, the type of wool. They ended up looking like they were nicknamed, some of them were nicknamed the chocolate soldiers. And in fact, I think it's Robin Barlow again, when it got wet, the uniform was almost identical to the Feldgrau that the Germans were wearing. So they binned that pretty quickly. They didn't use that. Of course, they couldn't all get khaki at the time. So they were using ex-post office uniforms in post office blue because they couldn't produce enough khaki cloth and uniform to clothe these new armies, Kitchener's new armies that were literally flowing through. They had so much difficulty in managing the recruitment, and much the same in Wales. Yeah. So there are local committees around Wales. It's very much, it's like the PALS battalions, and you've heard of those up north in Yorkshire, mostly in the Accrington PALS and the footballers. It's just on a bigger scale, and Lloyd George gets General McKinnon, who's in charge of Western Command, and Kitchener to agree to the plan that Wales will form its own army corps. Now that's 2 divisions, and that's the best part of about 50 to 60,000 men. The reality is it fails. By April of 1915, they realise they're not going to get that many. One of the reasons for that is Lloyd George's plan was that he was going to extract Welshmen who had already signed up out of wherever they happened to be to put them into his Welsh Army Corps. Totally impractical. Bear in mind we're at the time where the British Expeditionary Force has gone to France in the August. It's met with the Germans at Mons. It's then gone into the Great Retreat, all the way back to the Marne, where the Germans are stopped. It's then fought up to the Aisne, where the Germans start digging in and digging the first trenches. And then we get what's called the race to the sea, as each side tries to outflank each other. By the time we get to the First Battle of Ypres in October of 1914, the British Expeditionary Force, if you'll pardon my French, is on its arse. It is literally almost destroyed. I think, who was it? Horace Smith Dorrien said, when asked how his men were coping, they were hanging on by their eyelids. They were literally, how the Germans didn't break through is the miracle of the day. You had the miracle of the Marne, but first Ypres, isn't it? So getting Welsh officers, extracting Welsh soldiers was never going to happen. So we end up with just 1 division, which is the 38th. But the enthusiasm, I'll just read you a couple of snippets. The enthusiasm for it is huge within Wales. So on the 31st of December 1914, the citizens of Cardiff turned out in their thousands to give a send-off to the Cardiff City Battalion, which had broken its journey at Cardiff Station on its way from Porthcawl to Colwyn Bay. The welcome at the end of the journey was equally enthusiastic. The Western Mail reports that it received a hearty reception in Colwyn Bay. The town was gaily decorated in their honour, although this was hardly noticed in the pouring rain. All 3 resorts, the growing army of men was comfortably billeted by the sea. Hardly conducive to good training, the officers thought, but much appreciated by the troops. "We are in clover," one of them said, "and cannot wish for greater comfort." And that has a knock-on effect in the fact that the delays in equipping them, uniform, guns. I mean, the artillery were practicing with cartwheels sort of bolted together because they didn't have the guns. They were practicing unlimbering. They knocked together little carts, no horses. There's even reports that when the division left for France in the 5th of December 1915, that there were elements of the infantry that hadn't actually fired their rifles. And this adds to the High Command's views of the 38th, that it's a bit of a Lloyd George folly, it's a bit of a vanity project. There is already within the High Command a thought that Welsh soldiers are not up to it. Kitchener in particular, he says to Asquith that solely Welsh units, we shouldn't have them, they need to be stiffened by an element of Scotch or English. Charles A. Colonel Repington, who was Gary Sheffield calls him the most influential military commentator of the time. He's a former military officer, obviously with the title colonel, but I think I'm right in saying he had an assignation with another officer's wife, which was definitely a no-no in those days. So he left under a bit of a cloud, but he became the military correspondent for the Times, and he maintained his contacts. He was very, very close to the likes of Sir John French, Field Marshal Sir John French, and others in the High Command. And he regarded as Welsh soldiers, they were no better than scouts. That's what all they could be used for. So you've got this, and I go into this in more detail next week if you're interested in coming along. It's free. And so later in 1915, towards the sort of early summer, the division moves down. Once it's been decided there's not going to be an army corps, there's not going to be two divisions, the division moves down towards Salisbury Plain, down towards Winchester, and that's where they're billeted until they go to France. This is a great guy. I came across him when I was doing my research for this. This is D. Watts Morgan. He's a miner's agent from the Rhondda. He is one of the most effective recruiters that Wales had for the division. Another guy, local man, the Pontypridd Observer reports October 1915, a local man, Major J.S. Davis, who was the local recruiting officer for the Rhondda, had successfully enrolled 3,500 men in the armed forces. But this guy is even more impressive. So he's a miner's agent. He decided he was going to recruit an entire brigade, a PALS brigade, which is 4 battalions, so that's 4,000 men. And he was so successful, they sent him up to North Wales to do recruiting up there. He was a fluent Welsh speaker, so he was a member of the South Wales, I'm just reading, a member of the South Wales Miners' Federation since its inception. And on the 4th of August, the day war's declared, he enlists as a private in the 10th Battalion, 1st Rhondda of the Welsh Regiment. He's commissioned lieutenant in the 17th Battalion on the 7th of October 1914, and he's eventually promoted to captain in 1916. They don't send him to France. They use him as a strong voice in the recruitment of men from the Rhondda into the British Army. So he takes part in recruitment campaigns in North Wales, where, as I said, his Welsh language skills were to the fore. In March 1915, he's presented with a cheque for 100 guineas for his efforts in recruitment. And the Western Mail has this moniker for him. He's called the Organiser of Victory. So Lloyd George is the man who won the war. D. Watts Morgan is the bloke who organised the winning of the war from there. But it goes on. I mean, again, so in May 16, he transfers to a works battalion with the King's Liverpool Regiment. That becomes the Labour Corps later. And he gets promoted to major in November 1916, and he's sent over to France. He's mentioned in dispatches 3 times. And in May 1918, he's awarded the DSO, Distinguished Service Order. He leads his pioneer unit in a counterattack against German forces that were breaking through. So, if you don't know, in April 1918, Operation Michael, the spring offensive, the Germans tried to smash through, and the British and the French are pushed back, and until eventually we get the 100 days and we win. Sorry, spoiler alert. But they tried to break through lines. So the citation says, for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty, when his camp was heavily shelled, with a few NCOs and men, he turned some dugouts into a temporary dressing station and assisted the wounded in the vicinity. When shelling rendered his position untenable, he brought back his men in good order. He displayed great coolness and resource. He commands a demobilisation station after the war ends. He gets a letter from the king. He gets a CBE. And he's basically almost unknown. He's unknown in this part of the world as well. But again, you know, and just one of a number of remarkable men. Okay, the division. As I said, wasn't a great love for the British Army, so finding serving officers to command the division was a difficult enterprise in the first place. Lloyd George's involvement with the 38th becomes a bit of an albatross, truth be told. I'll go into it in more detail next Tuesday. One of the reasons he becomes a bit of an albatross, in part, is this guy over here. That's Ivor Phillips. Major General becomes later on in the war becomes Sir, but he's Major General Ivor Phillips, Liberal MP, very close friend and confidant of Lloyd George, and he's initially on the National Executive Committee that's set up. He's made brigade commander for 113th as it becomes brigade. But he is then in early 1915, he is elevated to command the division, becomes Major General. And the British High Command really don't like this. He was a veteran of the Indian Army. He served for over 20 years in India. Combat experience mentioned in dispatches. He fought in Burma, Northwest Frontier, and he was on the he was at the relief of Peking during the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, and he got his DSO for his efforts there. A very tall man, he was 6'5". His two brothers, John Winford Phillips and Owen Cosby Phillips, are also MPs. John becomes the first Viscount St David's, and Owen Cosby becomes Baron Clinford, and they go House Lords. They are known as the Three Giants because he's 6'5" and the other two 6'6" and 6'7" respectively. And there's some great cartoons of them from the time. But his links to Lloyd George, and there is no doubt that Lloyd George gave him a leg up. Lloyd George spoke to Kitchener about getting in command. And of course, British Army officers think he's an interloper. They're known as dugouts. There were loads of them, hundreds of them, because they had to bring people back out of retirement because they didn't have any officers for the new army. So it's not just the 38th Welsh Division, all the new army divisions were in a similar position. So I'll talk about him at length next week, but he's the so he's a commander of the 38th. That's Horatio Evans. It's the only photo I could find of him I couldn't find one of him without Mametz wood in the background. So that's Mametz wood there. He's a regular soldier, Welshman from North Wales, the oldest brigadier general on the Somme at the time. And he commands 115, 115th Brigade. That's T.O. Marden, again another professional soldier. Born in Bath, Staff College. He served in India. He was in the Directorate of Training. He's recalled, so he's a dugout. So he doesn't get anything like the criticism he gets, but he's a dugout. He's recalled and goes to France. He's wounded by shrapnel at 2nd Ypres in 1915. That's the first gas attack that the Germans used gas for the first time. And when he comes back, because of his links to Wales, he's given the command of a brigade. This one. This is Brigadier General. He becomes a Major General. Brigadier General Llewellyn Alberic Emilius Price Davis, BC. Okay. Now, I have the greatest, utmost respect and reverence for anybody who served in the British Armed Forces, but who gets a VC. This man's a prat, okay? I don't just say it. The people that served with him, and if anybody's read Up to Mametz by Llewellyn Wyn Griffith, he describes him as the second most stupid soldier I ever met. He says he was too dull to be scared. The first, if anybody wants to know, the dullest soldier was General Aylmer Hunter Weston, who proclaimed to men, Hunter Weston stood for election to Parliament during the Battle of the Somme, and was elected for a Scottish constituency, and he would announce it. Eventually, he commanded the 38th Welsh Division later in the war, and he would announce himself to his troops, "I am your commanding general and MP." Yeah, which, when you put it in the context of Haig not liking politicians, it's an interesting dynamic. He causes the division, the fallout after Mametz Wood is in a great part down to this man and what he does and what he writes and what he says in the aftermath of the engagement. I will say no more, because that's a fundamental aspect of next week. But that's the command of the 38th, and their names will come up as we go through, get closer to the engagement. That's just the basic. That's as I said, the order of battle for the infantry bits of the 38th. Again, I know for certain there's some in the audience will know this, but just for those that maybe like me, on the figure. So you've got the infantry, the 38th we had, and the reason that we've got the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, Welsh, and the South Wales Borders is because they were garrisoned in Wales. The Royal Welsh Fusiliers, bear in mind, if anybody's read Frank Richards' book, Old Soldiers Never Die, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers were known as the Birmingham Fusiliers because they recruited in the West Midlands because they couldn't get anybody in Wales to join. Again, Robert Graves tells the story of where he goes on a recruiting march through North Wales, with a band, you see it on the telly, and they actually managed to recruit, they're out for 3 days, they recruit a greenkeeper from Colwyn Bay Golf Club, or one of the golf clubs, and he leaves after 2 weeks because he's unfit. That's all they manage. So all this drum banging and marching around with the King's shilling, they get one bloke from the golf club who leaves. To placate Lloyd George to a certain extent, they base the brigades from the 38th will be based on these Welsh-based regiments. But you attach to that, I mean, I've mentioned the signallers in Abergavenny and the engineers. You've got field artillery, garrison artillery. They have a cyclist company, pioneer battalions. That was 19th Rhondda, I think. Trench mortar companies. You've got your ammunition column, supply trains, field ambulances. You had the Royal Army Medical Corps and St John's as well. You have veterinary element. They also had a mobile field scanner that was presented by a very rich woman from North Wales. It's a bit like a sort of X-ray type thing, I think. So you've got 18,000 officers and men, plus a staff. 4 infantry battalions, 4,000 officers and men, and then break down into companies. So that's what you move when you start, and we will see some of the movement in a little while. That's what they're moving around, mostly without trains or motor vehicles, marching. But that's the infantry element of the 38th. I'm sure you recognise at least one of these. Okay, on the far left. No, we'll start in the middle. Anybody care to shout out? You're not allowed to.
Haig.
That's Haig, yes. Dougie, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, commander of the British Expeditionary Force in France. He took over from his good friend Sir John French, who got into a bit of bother after the Battle of Lewes. Bit to do with reserves and not having them close enough. And Douglas was so friendly with him, he managed to stab him in the back. And French, he had some other problems as well. So he's removed. So he becomes Commander-in-Chief in December of 1915. Sir Henry Rawlinson, General, he is a close friend and confidant of Douglas Haig. He's in command of 4th Army. The 4th Army is given the responsibility for fighting the Battle of the Somme. Okay, so that's Rawlinson. Haig, Rawlinson and Haig have a funny relationship. Haig's view of Rawlinson is that he has no loyalty to anyone or anyone that serves with him. He, around the Battle of Neuve Chapelle in 1915, there is a bit of a faux pas, and Rawlinson throws the divisional commander under the bus. He lies, and this divisional commander is expected to, you know, hop off into the woods with his revolver and then don't come back. He doesn't. He fights his corner, and he proves that Rawlinson has lied. As a result, Sir John French cuts him off. He wants to send him back to Britain. He wants to bin him. And it's only through Haig's intervention that Rawlinson keeps his job. And French never speaks to him again. He will walk past him in headquarters and will ignore him in the corridor because he's besmirched. But he survives. He goes on to command 4th Army, he gets better, and he's highly regarded in the latter stages of the war. But he, after that, always regards Haig as having his back, which explains a few decisions a bit later on. This is Henry Horn, Lieutenant General Henry Horn. He's in command of 15 Corps, and it's 15 Corps that the 38th Division go to fight under at Mametz Wood, and he causes problems for Phillips and the division later. And there are issues with him that even to this day, and this is what prompted me to write my thesis, that he should have been held to account for the issues at Mametz Wood and not Ivor Phillips. And he should have been removed from command. But guess what? He's very good friends with him. They all fought together in the South African War. And the Australian historian Tim Travers puts this theory in his book, which I can't remember the name of now. But he talks about an old boys network, the protector and protege system, and they look after each other. Phillips is a dugout. He was Indian Army. Haig writes in his diary at one point that poor Phillips, you know, he was destined to be binned. He didn't even go to Staff College. He did. Ivor Phillips went to Staff College in 1895. I've got his report, his photographs, his class photographs. Have a guess who didn't go to Staff College? Henry Horn. Phillips didn't go to Sandhurst or Woolwich. He was in the militia, and he got what was called backdoor entry into it. He served the militia in the Wiltshire militia for 2 years. That allowed him then to apply to become a regular officer, and he went off and he was a member of the Staff Corps in India. So you might think, ooh, that holds against him, but of course Sir John French never went to Sandhurst. He got in by the back door. Horace Smith-Dorrien, the hero of First Heat, the survivor of Isandlwana in 1879, never went to Staff College, to Sandhurst or Woolwich. Hugh Trenchard, father of the RAF, he didn't go there either, but they held it against Phillips. There we go. More about that next week. Okay. The Western Front. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got, we're up here, aren't we? We've got the Marne. Where's Paris? So far down. So Paris down this. We get the Marne, we get the Aisne. This is by, sort of early 1916. This is where the front line really is in position. Right the way, 440 miles from Nieuwpoort in Belgium, all the way down to Alsace and the Swiss border. And you can see a couple of key, battles, Neuve-Chapelle, and that's where the Somme offensive takes place down there. So the intention to fight somewhere on the Western Front was taken in December of 1915, and not by Haig. It was taken by French. And there was an agreement that there would be a multi-front offensive. So the Russians would attack on the Eastern Front. Funny, I'll just throw this in, apropos nothing. Why do we call it the Western Front? Because we call it the Western Front in the Second World War, don't we? We call it the Eastern Front. Whose Western Front is it? Right. It's not to our west, is it? The Eastern Front is to our east, yeah. So we've always referred to it as a Western Front, but it's actually the German interpretation of the front, not ours. Just apropos nothing really, but there we go. So yeah, so they decided there's going to be 3 offences. The Italians are going to attack the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans down on their front. The Russians will have a go at them over on the east, and the British and French will do it on the Western Front. And they choose the Somme. Anybody know why? It's where the armies come together. It's where the French and the British armies come together. So there's the there's the front. I tell you what, just while I've got this up, that star up the top there, that's around sort of Leventi. It's where the 38th end up. After they go to France in the December of 1915, they go over, they're attached to Haking's 13 Corps. They go there with a memo from Paget at the War Office saying basically they're not fit for combat, they're not very well trained, bloody useless, basically. However, we think that we can make them better by training in theatre. And Phillips puts together a remarkable training regime. For all the criticisms, this guy is a really good organiser. That's what he's known for. He puts together a training regime around musketry, trench digging, wood fighting. Not much, but a bit of wood fighting, all these things. And within about 6 weeks, Haking is writing to Haig saying, Phillips is no good as a commander, I don't like him. Guess who Haking is very, very friendly with, by the way? Yeah, you guessed it, Haig and Rawlinson and co. He's in the club, Phillips isn't. But he says this division is the most improved and the best division I've had come through. He's got the Guards division in his corps, and the Welsh shadow the Guards. They're involved in the Christmas truce of 1915 that didn't happen. We've all heard about the Christmas truce of 1914 and the nonsense stories about football matches and all of that. We won't go there. There was a Christmas truce in 1915 despite Haig saying there wouldn't be. And elements of the 38th are involved in fraternisation. 2 officers in the Guards, Scots Guards, are put on the peg for fraternising, and they're quietly dropped. There's no courts martial, but the Welsh are involved in this. And there are other things which I touch on next week about why, and even more reasons why they're not very popular with the High Command. But anyway, so that's where they start out. And from, I've got to get my dates right on this. So they're up there in June 1916, up at Leventi. You can see Lille there, south of Ypres. And they march over 80 miles to get down to the Somme. And I mean march. There's no, on the trains, wagons or anything like that. They march down there. So they do 80 miles between the 12th of June and the 5th of July. They have a little stop off before Haig decides what he's going to do with them. So that's the Somme. Those of you who have been over there, Sarah at the top, all the names that are written in history and written in blood, actually. That's where the British and French armies coincide there. Haig would have preferred to fight in Flanders. He knew the area. He didn't want to fight in 16. He wanted to fight in 17 because that's where Kitchener said the new armies would be ready. They wanted a good 2 years to get them up to speed because they hadn't fought together. These were raw recruits. Untried and untested. Some of the new army got thrown in at the Battle of Loos, but most of them, they were looking for 1917. But they agree that they're going to do it in sometime in the summer of 16, and then the Germans become very, very uncooperative, and they attack the French at Verdun in February of 1916. Falkenhayn, the German commander, wants to bleed France white. And they throw. It's a horrendous. We talk about the Battle of Somme for the British. Verdun is the French version in many respects, and a whole different. And I'm way out of I know a little bit but way out of it. So that puts pressure on Haig to bring the offensive forward. It also puts pressure on the British resources because the French are pulling units out to try and stem the tide in Verdun. So, so that's the Somme front. French are down at the south here. The British are between, as I say, Serre. There's a diversionary attack at Goncourt which goes badly wrong for a variety of reasons which we won't go into. So 1st of July. You know, everybody knows it's the worst day for the British Army ever. Rawlinson's plan of attack is basically that he develops what becomes known as bite and hold. So attack a bit, consolidate, move your guns up, bombardment, attack another bit, so you bite and you hold it. Not Haig. Haig, and this is throughout his career, he does it at Loos, does it now, he does it later in Flanders. Haig is the eternal optimist. He always thinks he can get the breakthrough. He's always looking, and he gets criticism for being a cavalryman, because he is a cavalryman, about wanting to put this cavalry, because the plan is this: they attack along the front, they break through, you have a week-long bombardment of the German trenches, and bear in mind the Germans have been dug in since early 1915, all the way along the Western Front. They've had time to prepare. They're not going anywhere, okay? They're occupying bits of France. They're quite happy to occupy bits of France. The onus is on the Allies to attack and shift them, which is why British and French trenches are so bad, because they're never intended to be there permanently. If you start digging in and making concrete bunkers on the British and French side, you start to get comfortable, you don't want it, and the general and the high command and the politicians don't want that. Germans, on the other hand, they've got pianos. There are reports of pianos in some of their bunkers. They've got electricity. They're 40 feet underground. They can hold hundreds of men. The bombardment is the best part of 9 days, because the initial attack is put back 24 hours because of heavy rain. But what Haig does, Haig extends the depth of Rawlinson's bombardment from half a kilometre to a kilometre. I was never very good at maths at school, but even I know if you extend the area of something, but you don't increase the volume of stuff you're going to put on that area, you dilute what's going to happen, and that's exactly what happened with the British bombardment. Of 1.5 million shells, it is estimated that 500,000 didn't go off. For a variety of reasons: soft ground, not very good fuses at that point that wouldn't explode. And of course, so the million that are left, they're now diluted over a much bigger range, which is why when the poor devils at the top here around Serre and Beaumont-Ham, all up there, that's why they get a bit of a surprise that there's Germans coming out of their trenches to shoot at them, because they've been promised that they would just walk across. And as we know, that didn't happen. Yeah, and Haig just kept meddling with Rawlinson's plan constantly. So just come up, first day of the Somme, 19,400 killed, 35,943 wounded. Haig's diary for the day records some words to this effect: considering the number of troops that we deployed across the front, not a bad result. Or words to that effect, okay? But it's on the 1st of July. The success, Haig recognises late on the 1st, he's had some success south of the Roman road, south of the Albert-Bapaume road, down around here, Mametz, Fricourt, and around that area. So he decides he's going to concentrate his forces and his next attack south of the road. His intention is to attack, we can see the dotted line, the 14th of July. This one. The German second line, down there. So he breaches the first line in the south, down around this area, and you can see this dotted line is just about where they got to on the 1st of July. That's Mametz wood. It's part of, Martin Middlebrook calls it the horseshoe of woods. So you've got Mametz, you've got the Byzantines, Highwood, Delville wood, Trones, Bernafray wood. That's the horseshoe, and that's the biggest wood on the Somme. And the plan is, he's going to attack up the Byzantine ridge, the Byzantine Longueville ridge. He's going to breach the second line, and he's going to get his cavalry through, and they're going to go all the way up there towards Bochum and roll up the German forces. Spoiler alert, it didn't happen. But that's why Mametz wood becomes important, because he wants to secure that on his left flank. Bernafray and Trones will be secured on his right flank. So on the evening of the 1st of July, the 38th Welsh Division are told to move. They're told to move down towards 4th Army, under the command of Rawlinson and Horn. So they then start moving. They've moved a bit further down from Leventi. They're closer to the Somme, but they've still got a good sort of 15-20 miles and they're messed about a bit as well. And they get there on or around the 5th of July. Okay, this is the other side. So we've got to talk about them. You've got elements of, there's a few more, but the elements of the 16th Bavarian Infantry and these guys. This is the Lehr Regiment. And remember what I said about the new army and about the 38th. They are untried, they are untested, they've never been in combat. They've done some trench raids up north, up in Leventi, some very good trench raids. Some of their trench raids the reports of them were sent up to Hague. They were very effective at trench raiding. In fact, one of them, one of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers colonels, developed a trench knife. You've seen it, right? You've seen it. I'll Google it. It looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. It's a little sword. If anybody's seen the film The Lord of the Rings, Sting, that Frodo and Bilbo Baggins use, it looks like that. It's got a wide, and he actually gets these made and issued to his men, and they use them in trench raids, and they're really effective. You know, I mean, you've got clubs with nails in, and you've got knuckle dusters and bayonets and this sort of sharpened shovels. Brutal practice trench raiding, going in, capturing prisoners, and getting intelligence. But they developed this sword, but they're raw. This lot, not so. Remember, when Britain went to war in 1914, we had 120,000 men in the British Expeditionary Force. On the 4th of August, every adult male in Germany was a trained soldier. Because they'd had conscription and they had been in the reserves. So they'd all done at least a 2-year stint in the army, and then they would have regular biannual or whatever 5 annual is, training. So they put 4 million men in the field. Once they mobilised, and they had more to come. I mean, let's not go with the Russians. But yeah, so these guys were part of the Kaiser's personal guard. They were also the training detachment at Potsdam, so they trained the rest of the German army. Their NCOs, many of them were highly qualified snipers. We'll find out where their success comes later. In terms of their battle commitments, bear in mind the German doctrine was they would keep their troops on the line indefinitely. They would rotate. You know, you come out for a bit of leave. But if you were a regiment and you were on the Somme, in front of the Mametz wood in the German second line, you'd been there for probably the best part of a year. They knew the ground, they observed the ground. The 38th went in on the 5th of July and attacked on the 7th. They lived on the 5th, by the way, earlier the 6th. So they'd been embedded there. I've mentioned the concrete bunkers and all of this stuff. And, you know, they had telephones and lights. And as I said, one was found with a piano. Eventually, one was found with women's underwear and all sorts in there. So, there was what the goings on in the German trenches. you can only guess at. So they're part of the Guards Fusilier Regiment. So in August 1914, they are at the forefront of the Schlieffen Plan, which is the German plan to come around the side of the French defences through Belgium, which is what led Britain to come into the war. They take Namur, the city of Namur. They're then sent over to the Eastern Front. They fight at the Battle of the Masurian Lakes in September 1914. Then the Battle of Lodz in December 1914. They see action in the Carpathians and Galicia in support of Austro-Hungarian forces, fighting the Russians. Just before they brought back in April 1916, they fight in the Gorlice-Tarnow offensive. And then they sent over to the Western Front, to the Somme, for a rest. Okay? That is the calibre of troops that the blokes from up the Rhondda, or from the fields of Carmarthen, or the dock offices of Cardiff, wherever, who've never held a rifle in their lives, that's what they're up against. And it makes the outcome and the way that they were treated in the aftermath of Mametz would, in my mind, even more unforgivable. More about that on Tuesday. So yeah, that's boy in mind. Right, we're getting the guts of it. Now we're looking on time, Al. Oh, hour in, we're all right. Here we are. There's the beast, Mametz Wood. This is a Rolls Flying Corps photograph taken on the 5th or 6th of July of 1916. It's in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers collection in North Wales, and I have permission to use it. So yeah, so that's the hammerhead there. There's some other sort of satellite-y photos in a sec, but you can see with the woods, that's the Byzantines at the top there. It's in full foliage. So all the reports that they could see this going on, how anyone from the air could see anything, I really don't know. So the 38th Division are going to be coming in over this side. Sabo and Flatiron Copse, they cause problems later on. But you can see an element, it's not the best of photos, bear in mind it's over 100 years old, but you can see the lie of the land. 17th Division, who play a part in all of this, they're going to be fighting down from this end. So around, I don't know which trench it is, Wood Trench, it's the quadrangle there. It's down in that area where Sassoon goes running into a trench, single-handed with his pistol, kills a lot of Germans because his backman's been shot and killed, and then he sits down and, according to Robert Graves, reads a volume of poetry before wandering back, gets a real row off his commanding officer because whilst he was in the trenches, they didn't have a chance to bombard it and attack and seize the trench. So that happens down this neck of the woods down here. Okay. When I mentioned then, it's another pop quiz. Welsh Division, 38th Welsh Division, is so inexperienced. Why get them to attack this wood? Anybody care to advance a theory? You can answer this one.
Afford to lose the men.
Sorry?
We could afford to lose those men.
Touching them up.
There's a book called The Unknown Army. It's a very thin book by Dallas and Gill. And what their theory is this, and this is not unknown throughout the First World War. They will use less experienced battalions because the more experienced battalions wouldn't do it. Because they're so experienced, they know if they go charging down that road, that line, that trench, into that wood, there's a very good chance they might not come back out if you're that experienced. Whereas the newbies, keen to make an impression in some respects, don't know the danger in many respects. Yeah, they know it's warfare, but they just don't see it. And there's a theory that Dallas and Gill put forward, is that basically they were used to, we couldn't afford to lose them because we didn't have that many to lose. But, let's lose them. And there are some elements of the story and what happens is that support that, I think, about some of the reports that come out of it and then what happens towards the end. So, we'll give you a tick for that one, yeah, good answer. Okay, photos, aerial photo. Clue, it's a wood. Sassoon's menacing wall of gloom. So that bit there, for those of you that have been over, that's Flatiron Copse Cemetery, which is at the top end of what becomes known as Death Valley. So that's the hammerhead. That's sort of bits of caterpillar wood there. So the attack on the 7th of July is going to go across, across there. So as I said, 1st of July, Somme starts. In the evening, 38th are asked to move. 2nd of July, Haig tells Rawlinson, it's not a suggestion, he directs him, focus your efforts on securing Mametz wood. And Lancelot Kidgel, who's Haig's chief of staff, writes, this is how important the importance Haig puts on this. This is the investment he's put into the Somme. Because he's told all the politicians, this is going to work, this is the breakthrough. And he doesn't do this very often, but so he's had a meeting with Rawlinson, he's told him what he's going to do, and Kidgel gets Kidgel to write to him and put it in writing. Mametz wood is of great tactical importance. Why use newbies if it's that important? Unless it is in our possession, the left flank of the main attack on the German second line would be very insecure. Furthermore, with Mametz in our possession, Bazentine-le-Petit wood and the enemy trenches to the south of it will be seriously threatened by us, and it may prove possible to assault them. So it's that important. 2nd of July. Rawlinson just wants to bombard it constantly and charge at the middle, but Haig will have nothing to do with it. 3rd of July, Royal Irish Regiment get into the wood down the southern part. They find that there are very few Germans in there. They kill a few that are bivouacked around some guns and nick the breech blocks. Surprisingly, they find a Frenchman, don't ask me from where, but they find a Frenchman who gives them intelligence on what the wood is made up of and the type of trees and all of this. They capture a German who says, well, they've all pulled back. They've all gone back to the second line defence, there's nobody here. The problem with that is that the Royal Irish put a report in. Horn is away at the conference, he's left no measures in place to take action, so nothing happens till late in the day. 2nd Royal Welsh Fusiliers, or part of 7th Division, get involved in launching an attack, because when Horn comes back from his conference in late afternoon, he says, oh, we're doing a bit of an attack. They mess up, and they don't get to the jump-off point until the early hours of the following morning. The attack goes off and it's a complete failure. And it's actually criticised in the official history, because Edmund says in the official history, it would appear that if 15 Corps had encouraged more vigorous action on the afternoon of the 3rd of July, a hold on Mametz wood could have been secured, and Wood Trench and Quadrangle Trench occupied. So all of the losses potentially that the 38th Welsh Division and Wales, all these little villages, Pontypridd, all of those losses, maybe, or a lot of them, could have been saved if Henry Horn had been doing his job properly. Okay. Yeah, so on the 5th of July, the 38th are moving down. There's attacks on Quadrangle Trench, which is the southern bit. And it's there that 2nd Lieutenant Wilfrid Brynmore Williams, 16th Welsh from Llantwit Vardra, he is leading one of 8 reconnaissance groups. They're looking at the approach to Queen's Nullah, which is a bit further down, looking over there. We'll see on the map in a second. And he's killed by artillery fire. So that's one of our locals who didn't make it back, and that's on the 5th of July. So then on the 5th, late on the 5th, the 38th relieve the 7th Division, who are Horn's favourite boys. Horn loves the 7th Division. Very, very good fighting division, been in the war from the start. Okay, so that's that. The photograph we've just shown, which is, I think there's Flatiron Copse Cemetery, so it's taken just this side of the road there. You're looking down, as I say, on Mametz Wood. For those of you that have been there, that's where the dragon is, just by there. You can see the sticky out bits, the different trenches, quadrangle and all is down there. Queen's Nullah is down around here. There's a cliff, we'll see on the trench map shortly, there's a cliff there that ranges between something sort of 4 or 5 feet and 20 feet. The ground, as you can see, slopes up to the wood up there, and it slopes down from the escarpment there. Again, if you've been there, that's taken from the Dragon. So looking up towards the Byzantines up there, Flatiron Copse is just up around the corner. The road bends up around there, so you can see the slope of the ground, so you can hide in the dead ground down around this area. And that's the Hammerhead will be the first part that they'll attack. Again, that puts it into context. So you're looking up from there, up towards Flatiron Copse. You see the higher ground up here on the ridge, dropping down and then up towards, what's that, 200 yards I suppose, up towards the wood. Yeah, so that's a trench map from the War Diary of 115th Brigade, I think it is. So 7th of July. Worth noting on the map, so you've got the central ride, you've got the 2 cross rides, you've got the Hammerhead, as you can see there. So the plan on the early hours of the 7th of July is this. 17th Division are going to attack down here, quadrangle support, wood trench. So they're going to attack in there. If by 8 o'clock they've not succeeded in securing these trenches around here, the attack of the 38th Welsh Division on the Hammerhead will be postponed for half an hour to allow for an extra bombardment. If they're successful, they're going to attack into the wood from this flank, whilst our Welsh boys are going to go in here. And you can see the photo. This is quite a modern photograph from Google Earth, but you can see, roughly the. It looks very plain, but of course this wood hasn't been managed for the best part of 2 years. The attack, responsibility for the attack is given to the 115th Brigade under Horatio Evans, who goes out and scopes the ground the day before. He knows that in Flatiron Copse and Sabo Copse up here there are German troops. The German second line, as you can see, is running across the top there. Sabo, Flatiron. There are machine guns in there. They don't know what's in there, but they're assuming there are machine guns, although the intelligence is saying it's virtually empty. In the second line trenches up there, there's artillery, there's machine guns, etc. Ground is going up that way. Horatio Evans decides that what he wants to do, he wants to have instead of a 2-battalion attack, because the plans have come from 15 Corps. They have not come from the 38th. Phillips and his staff have not created the plans. They've looked to implement them, but they've been ordered what to do. Evans recognises the risk from Flatiron and Sabo Copse for the enfilade fire down here, which is coming straight into the sides of his men. So he decides he's going to have a 1-battalion attack from here, and he's going to stack his battalions up behind. Horn gets wind of this, and he sends a message to the division and says, or his staff say, the Corps Commander considers it is dangerous to collect more than 2 battalions in the western end of Caterpillar Wood and valleys in the vicinity, owing to the danger of hostile shell fire if the troops are overcrowded. 2 battalions are sufficient for the attack on the eastern projection of the wood, Hammerhead, with a 3rd in support in Montbarn Alley and a 4th further back. So he basically orders Evans not to change his plans, which means Evans' plans have got to be reworked, and it is very little time to translate these plans back down to the battalions that are there. One of the things that then doesn't happen, and it's whether it's Evans' fault because he didn't ask, or whether the weather intervened, as some people say, but the smoke screen that was agreed to be put in to protect the flank so they couldn't see them doesn't happen. 17th Division attack at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 7th, and they are unsuccessful. So by 6:30, 38th Division are told, halt your attack. It's not going in at 8 o'clock, it's going in at 1:30. So between 8 and 8:30, the edge of the wood is bombarded, and at 8:30, they attack. And they are stopped. So let's see what we got here. This is Private William Joshua, 16th Welsh Machine Gun Regiment, Cardiff Battalion. We advanced about 50 yards when the German machine guns opened up. So they're coming out of dead ground and up the hill. So they can't be seen initially, they're hidden. When the German machine guns opened up, Sergeant Harry shouted out, "They are yards high," and it appeared so. Then going down a gentle slope to the wood, the enemy got range with deadly effect. Joshua gets shot in the thigh at this point. Now the German artillery started up, and to add to the horror, the rain started to fall heavily, making the churned up ground into clinging mud. I dumped my equipment and started to crawl back. Some stretcher bearers found me and took me to a large shell hole. So that's that's the experience of the man on the ground. Lieutenant Coslin of the German 122 Infantry Regiment, who's in and around this area, they emerged from their siege trench brandishing their weapons. We duly welcomed them with well-executed rapid fire, which was downright cataclysmic. Due to the short distance, most of them fell immediately. So that was the impact as they attacked across that ground. The phone lines have already been cut, so the communications, we haven't got radios or any, well we have, but they're not very effective and there are not very many of them and they're on the back of huge trucks. So the phone lines that have been laid for comms were cut at 8 o'clock by both British and German artillery, so they can't maintain contact with the forces on the ground. 9 o'clock, the attack bogs down about 200 yards from the edge of the wood, probably where that road is near there. Evans asked for another barrage, he's denied, so he's not having it. Great, so he's got 2 battalions stuck out there, men trying to crawl back, digging in. He's ordered not to throw any more troops into the fight from the corps, from Rhan. And I mean, later he gets down to this area because they are literally trapped there. He sends over 4 companies from 10th South Wales borderers to try and reinforce them. It takes them 4 hours, or 3.5 hours, to get from their start trenches down there where they can go across because the trenches are full of wounded, the mud and all the chaos that's going on. So they can't really reinforce. 11th South Wales borders, 16th Welsh, they are desperately trying to fight their way across. They are crawling forward, they're throwing bombs. There's reports that they were still bombing, still attacking, but they can make no ground. They've been shelled by the Germans. British artillery is also falling on its own men. So they're in a hell of a state. I've got some figures, just let you know. They're losing officers like it's going out of fashion, to be perfectly honest, and there's no leadership. So Llewellyn Griffith, in the book there, a bit later in the day says, men were burrowing into the ground with their entrenching tools, seeking whatever cover they might take. Wounded men were crawling back from the ridge. Men were crawling forward with ammunition. No attack could succeed over such ground as this, swept from the front and the side by machine guns at short range. 400 killed, wounded, missing, just on this one short attack over that one short day. By about 5 o'clock, 5:30, Evans is ordered to launch another attack, but he's not allowed to use any more men. He's got to use what he's got. He can't reorganise his machine guns, he can't reorganise his trench mortars in such a time because of the conditions, but he's getting his men and what he's got in place, and Phillips orders the attack to stop. And that will be the final nail in Phillips's coffin when it comes to Rhan, which we'll go into a bit later. So 17th Division, who are banging away down around Quadrangle Trench, they fail as well. Their commanding officer is Pilcher. He's in Hayes and Horn's bad books as well, 24 hours before Phillips got there, but yeah. So they eventually, about 6 o'clock, they start to withdraw. They leave a couple of companies in their original kick-off lines, jump off point, just to hold the line. So we get, for example, Private Herbert Bryson, 16th Welsh, from Alpha Street in Coed Pontypridd. He was a miner at the Great Western Collieries. He was killed trying to rescue others stuck out in no man's land there. He married a May Ratcliffe in 1909 in Ponty. His 4-year-old son died just before he left for France. He has no known grave. He's remembered on the Teapot Memorial. You know, even more perhaps heartrending, Albert Oliver and Ernest Oliver, 16th Welsh from Porthgwain Road, Pontypridd. They had 10 other siblings. Dad was a miner. They were members of the Tîm Mawr Colliery Band in Hopkinstown and enlisted as musicians and stretcher bearers. And they were acting as stretcher bearers when killed. Albert, he was killed during the attack on the Hammerhead on the 7th. And he's in Flatiron Copse Cemetery just up by there. And his brother Herbert, he died on the 10th. He's in Danzig Alley Cemetery, so they're not even better together. Henry Morgan and Charlie Morgan from Splot, worked for Blaenavon Steel and Iron Company, 16th Welsh. They're dead, they both died. And then if you've been over there, the Tregaskis brothers, they're famous is probably the wrong word, but they're the most well-known, I suppose, on the Song of the Brothers. They were from Penarth originally. I took Stanwell School, which was their school, I took them over on a tour. They have an annual pilgrimage. They went to Canada, set up a farm in Ottawa. When war was declared, got back, they found a manager for the farm, got back on the boat, came over, joined up, 16th Welsh again. They joined up together, they trained together, they were promoted as NCOs, corporal, sergeant together, they were commissioned together, and they died together on the 7th of July. And they're in Flatiron Copse Cemetery. I got to mention the 4 McConnell brothers from Cardiff, because they are my wife's great uncles. Thomas, he died of wounds he's in Merville, up near Leventi, where they were first based in. He died in May. But Samuel, he died on the 7th of July in the attack on Hammerhead, and he's on Teapfall as well. He has no known grave. My wife has very little interest in military history and the First World War, but she sobbed when she went to Mametz and Teapfall and saw his name on there. So, you know, it does affect people, and it's why perhaps I blather on like this. Anyway, we're running out of time, so okay. So 7th of July is a total washout. No ground has been captured. They've not got anywhere near the wood. If you read Haig's diary, he's scathing in his reports. I can send you a copy of this if you want it.
Yeah.
I got it. It said the war diary, but I've got it on photo if you want. There are a couple of other events that happen over the sort of the 7th, 8th, and 9th. Haig, 8th of July, he's down banging on Rawlinson's door, wanting to know why things aren't going the way they want, and tells him to get Mametz wood and push towards Pozières, which is up the top of the hill. 15 Corps order the 38th Division again, so it's nothing to do with Phillips, it's coming from Horn to do a trench raid. Price Davis, my friend, VC, and you can see here, is it on this one? Something like a company front, not necessarily the whole company, so a company's 100 men. Price Davis is jigging up a battalion of men to attack, and it all goes badly wrong. In fact, it just doesn't happen. By the time they get men, there's confusion between the orders, which happens throughout the engagements, and it basically doesn't happen. Phillips orders an inquiry, he's too late. Horn is already ordering an inquiry into Ivor Phillips, and in the early hours of the 9th of July, Ivor is dragged over to Horn's headquarters and is summarily dismissed and sent back to England in disgrace, as is Pilcher from 17th Division. And come along on Tuesday, you'll find out my views on this, but it wasn't Phillips's fault. And I am a Phillips fan, and Gareth will too. I'm actually writing his biography at the moment. If ever you're going to think of writing a biography about anybody, by the way, pick somebody who writes a diary all the time, keeps all of his letters and all of his photographs, and the family don't sell them. Because I got no bloody letters, I got no diary, and he sold his photographs to China. Anyway, that's that. So, Phillips is gone. And this man, Herbert Watts, is the commanding officer of 7th Division, Horn's favourites. Horn doesn't want him put in command, he wants a guy called Blackadder. Yes, there was a guy called Blackadder. General and very well thought of, and he commands the 38th after Mametz would. But in the meantime, Herbert Watts, this is obviously later on in his career because you can see he's got his wings, flying corps wings. He is given command of the 38th to do with as you wish, but capture the wood. He goes over with a guy called Bonham Carter. He's his GSO 1, his General Staff Officer 1. That's Bongy Bonham Carter. Bongy Bonham Carter, of the Bonham Carters, yes, they are related to her, Harry Potter. But his brother is Herbert H. Asquith's private secretary, and married to Asquith's daughter. Bear in mind, Asquith will soon be ousted by guess who? David Lloyd George. When Bonham Carter writes his biography, which is unpublished in the 1930s, he is not very complimentary towards either Phillips, who is Lloyd George's mate. There might be some other reasons behind that, I don't know. Tuesday. And another guy called Guy Drake Brockman, Guy Lewis Pierce Drake Brockman, and he, along with David, Price Davis, DC, he also puts the knife into Phillips and the 38th Welsh Division when he writes to the official historian in 1930. And his letter, 12 pages of it, which you can go and have a look at in the National Archives, I have it, it's got my fingerprints on it. He is savage about Phillips. David Davis MP, who was in command of one of the battalions and who was pulled out by Lloyd George just before Mametz would, for political reasons. Lloyd George takes over as Minister of War, he wants in it. But Drake Brockman makes horrendous allegations, none of which stand up. If you examine them, as I have done, none of them stand up. But they're still used, even to this day, by eminent historians. One, just off the top of my head, is that the 38th Welsh Division were given orders to run away when faced with machine guns. Absolutely no evidence of that at all. None at all. But it's that sort, and that added then to the firmament and the allegations against the division after the war. Yeah, okay. Right, screen on. So, 10th of July, the plan is this. They're going to attack the southern part of the wood, okay? Down here, so they're going to attack across this ground here. Queen's Nullah's down there, Cliff Trench. So they're away from the enfilading fire of the copses up there. 38th are going to do it. Watts introduces the creeping barrage, which we've nicked from the French, so that it rolls in front of the advancing troops. He also puts machine gun companies either side to try and suppress fire from the wood. But otherwise, they're using Phillips's plan, the plan that they drew up. He's using it. He's amended it slightly, but it's their main plan. So the plan is they're going to attack across there. You've got the southern ride is there, central ride comes down there, and their objectives are the first ride, there's a second ride there, and then the northern end of the wood. It's as simple as that. If only things were so simple. Just remember, what does they say? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. See that shot there? That's taken from up where the dragon is, because it's on a raised mound. That's taken from that road. So you can see the difference in perspective and where you're hidden. So you can see the slope that goes up there. Yeah, don't worry about that. That's just same view. Well, there's the split. That's from the high ground, that's from the low ground. And that's the sort of corner of the hammerhead there. So, 3:30, 10th of July, that's the disposition of the 38th. That's where they're going to attack from. two brigades, 113th under Price Davis, 114th under Marden. And it's at this point where you get the stories of the hymns. You get Carden of 14th, he's written down here, 14th, 16th Royal Welsh Fusiliers. Rhan Carden, who holds a drumhead service. They sing Jesus, Lover of My Soul to the tune of Aberystwyth, apparently. There's reports from other units from outside the division. And at that point, he says to his men, he says, boys, make your peace with God, because we're going to take that wood, and some of us are not coming back, but we are going to take it. And he gets his handkerchief out and ties it around his walking stick. For Blackadder aficionados, he says you can't face a German machine gun without your walking stick. He ties his hanky around his walking stick. He says, boys, this is so you can see where I am. Trouble is, the German machine gunners could see where he was as well. And as they attack down the left flank, he's wounded as they come down the hill. Just before he gets to the wood, he's killed. And he's buried in Carlisle Cemetery, 17th Lancer. He's got the 17th Lancers badge on his gravestone. Played polo with Douglas Haig in India, and Drake Brockman tells a whopping big lie and says the reason that Phillips was sacked was because Haig found out about Carden being killed, so he sacked him because he killed his friend. Phillips had been sacked 24 hours before Carden even got to the trenches. Another calumny, another lie. So that's the plan of attack. It's going to go in at 4:15 in the morning, and as I said, that's the first objective, Lower Cross Ride. Second objective, end of the top of the wood. Communication's difficult, as we know, because the telephone lines, they get cut, but you've got timed barrages. So they put a barrage on the edge of the wood, they move it off to elsewhere, hoping that the German's going to pop up, and then bring it back on, a bit of whack-a-mole on the edges of the wood. Yeah, this is what I came across in my research. The Western Mail reported how, again, there's a poignancy to this. You know, we've got the service and all. The Aberdare boys in one battalion all shook hands and said goodbye to each other before they went over the top. You know, just from up the road. Sergeant T.J. Price, who wrote didn't bring his book. Colin Hughes wrote the book Mametz, Lloyd George's Army at the Battle of the Somme, which was the first book that attacked the myth about the cowardice and all that. But so Price wrote to Colin Hughes. As the barrage started, we moved off in quite an orderly fashion. The tension and noise cannot be described, what with the traction of the shells through the air and the noise of explosions all around us. Men were falling in all directions due to intense machine gun fire coming against us. How we got into the wood, I do not know, but we got there and entered it for a short distance before the Germans came at us head on. And there was quite a lot of action before we got into shell holes or any other form of cover we could get. Captain John Glyn Jones. Machine guns and rifles began to rattle and there was a general state of pandemonium, little of which I can remember, except that I myself was moving down the slope at a rapid rate with bullet holes in my pocket and yelling a certain amount. Sergeant Richard Lyons. Progress through the wood was slow, mainly due to German machine gun fire, but also due to the density of undergrowth in the wood. This also impeded visibility. It was difficult to maintain a sense of direction, but I was helped in this by being able to tell the difference between the sound of our guns and the Germans. And that was the problem. The only people that had compasses were the officers, and they were being cut down like it was going out of fashion as they led from the front. So once they got into the wood, great difficulty in working out which direction was which, where they were going, what the objectives were. You couldn't see it. This is Carden's lot. Just at the start, he decided to go and visit the CO of 14th Royal Welsh. So he's 20 minutes late. So the start, they kick off before he gets back. So his battalion loses the protection of the creeping barrage as well, which doesn't do his legacy any good. But they get across. I mean, 13 Welsh on the extreme right, 3 attempts to get into the wood. Once they were there, they found it incredibly difficult to know where they were. So it gets really, really confusing. It's dark, it's hot, it's dusty, and that's how the attack progresses. And what starts throwing in more battalions very early on, so it gets even more confusing in there. So it's horrendous, it's bitter, it's hand-to-hand fighting. There are tripwires in there, there are snipers in there. It's not a nice place to be. Okay. Yeah. As I said, by 5:30, they're pushing these other battalions in. Writer called Gerald Brennan, who was a British Army officer, he goes into the wood afterwards, and this is his description of it. Okay, a place where something almost unheard of in this war had taken place. Fierce hand-to-hand fighting in the open with bombs and bayonets. All the dead bodies just lay there as they had fallen in their original places, as though they were being kept as an exhibit for a war museum. This is weeks after the attack, by the way. Two of them, this had to be seen to be believed, stood locked together by their bayonets, which had pierced one another's bodies and sustained in that position by the tree trunk against which they had fallen. Llewellyn Griffiths mentions it, I think, in his book. There was one soldier was a South Wales borderer. He mentions that. And then you get this. This is Underoffizier Kreibung of the Lear Regiment. 2 shells landed directly on top of his men. 6 men were entombed inside. We immediately began tearing away at the earth and could hear someone shouting, but our rescue efforts did not save anyone. And then Llewellyn Griffiths records, when he goes into the wood later, 3 men digging in a trench, thigh deep in the red soil, digging their own grave as it chanced, for a bursting shell turned their shelter into a tomb. So the same things are happening on either side. You know, it's not just the agony of the Welsh division. The Germans are getting it as well. 13th Welsh are desperately trying to consolidate in the Hammerhead. By about 7:15, they secure the first right by 5:30. By quarter to 8, they've started to secure positions in there in the Hammerhead. But as they put more men in, the Germans infiltrate behind them, and they actually completely destroy at least one company of the 15th Welsh who are going in that way. So, you know, they're not getting their own way, and it is really, really bitter, vicious hand-to-hand fight. And if you read any of the books on it, there's loads in there. Let's move this on. There's that artwork there is by Edward Henry Handley Reid, and it's in the Glyndwr collection in Swansea. So you can see, I mean, it is artwork, and obviously there's an artist's perspective of it. That's a more modern picture of the wood as it is now. It's quite clean and tidy in there, but it wasn't anything like that. There were trees down, you know, none of it had been controlled, because they used it for hunting and things like that. So that's you know, just a representation of the wood, really. There are a number of reports from the men of the 38th that, and we know that the Germans did this. They seeded the wood with tear gas, weeping shells. So they had to put their gas goggles on. Later in the engagement, they had to wear gas hoods because there was gas shells coming over as well, just to make it even more uncomfortable, if you can believe it. At about 2 o'clock, 10th Welsh advanced towards the second ride across the middle of the wood. They're driven back by the Germans, but on the 2nd or 10th, they reach it. And then again, more units are sent back in, or sent into the wood to try and consolidate across there. And it's at this time where Sergeant William Loud, 10th Welsh, originally from Somerset, but he was a collier living in Cwm Park in the Rhondda. He was a constable in the Glamorgan Constabulary, and in my steg. He's killed in Mametz Wood, and he's still in there. Love him, and memorialised up on Teatval. And that's the early shot, so 6:15. By 6:15 they've taken the first objective and they start moving through. That's then later in the day as they start to push. And it's at this, when they get to the second ride, and my hero, there he is, that's Sergeant Loud. Frank Hawkins. I'll read the. This is from the newspaper. So, footballer's bravery, how Ron the officer won the Military Cross. Lieutenant Frank Hawkins, the popular Ron the sportsman and Welsh international footballer, has been awarded the Military Cross for a daring piece of work in France, in the performance of which, however, he unfortunately received a severe wound. He's now in hospital in Oxford, well known in the Rhondda as licensee of the Chynwyth Hotel in Porth. Joined the colours soon after the outbreak of war. During the attack on the Mametz, the gallant footballer performed the daring act which gained for him the coveted distinction. His platoon had been greatly troubled by a hidden machine gun which kept picking the men off from behind, and Lieutenant Hawkins eventually decided to endeavour to discover the enemy's whereabouts. Going back half the length of the wood, which was alive with enemy fire, he located the Germans, 5 in number, in a large shell hole behind some trees, where they were keeping up a steady fire from their machine gun. Whilst he was getting up closer, the Germans caught sight of Lieutenant Hawkins and, training the gun in his direction, managed to wound him. Evidently thinking he was dead, they turned their attention to his men, which gave the officer an opportunity to get his 2 concussion bombs in order. Having done this, he managed, despite his wound, to creep up to a position from which he hurled the bombs into the middle of the enemy, 4 of whom were killed, whilst Lieutenant Hawkins, making a dash forward, shot the remaining German, an officer, through the head, thus silencing the gun and undoubtedly saving the lives of many of his men. Absolutely brilliant. Except, and then this doesn't actually diminish this in any, but the Cambria leader on the 12th of October in 1917 reported how Hawkins had killed the German officer with his bare hands by strangling him. We will probably never know which is the truth. I mean, if, you know, I suspect there may be both elements of it. You know, they were fighting literally with their bare hands for their lives, gouging, biting, kicking. Doesn't bear thinking about. It really doesn't. But yeah, he got the MC for his efforts there, and so he should. I mean, these are just contemporary photographs of Mametz Wood during and after the engagement. You can see some of the trenches there. You know, look how decimated it is. That shows you some of the conditions they were fighting in. German howitzer, again, you know, hidden in amongst all that. It's snipers up in the trees. As I said, the Leia Regiment, their NCOs were noted for their sniping capabilities, and they were picking people off as they moved through the wood. I'm gonna rattle through this as best I can now. So they get to the central line on the 10th, 4:30, and the plan is starburst the attack out up towards the German second line and the northern end of the wood. I mentioned the snipers there, so they're picking people off, and they get to within about 40 yards of the edge of that wood. But the machine gun fire and the artillery that's coming from the second line defences there, and whoever's still hidden in that wood, is literally driving them back. And of course, you remember that, you can see the second line, you know, it comes down there as well, Pearl Alley Trench. You've got the copses. So it's all being poured onto them, plus the British artillery are falling short. And there's Fusilier W.R. Thomas, who's down in Queen's Nullah. So he's down here looking up to the ridge. And he says, I could see several hundreds of fully accoutred Germans silhouetted on the skyline, pouring into the wood from the north across our front from the direction of Contalmaison, which is up there. And Rawlinson writes in his diary for the day, he says, another day of heavy fighting. The 38th Division succeeded in capturing practically the whole of Mametz Wood, which was a hell of a compliment from Rawlinson, but he changes his tune very, very quickly. Basically, they managed to get into that position by 10 o'clock and overnight, 10th into the 11th. They hold the ground, so they hold most of the wood behind the railway line there. And it's in the night that, again, more criticism stems They're obviously nervous. There's some wild firing going on, and Price Davis claims that he interrupted a large body of men trying to run out of the wood at one point, and he actually puts pen to paper on that. Go into more of that on Tuesday. But that's the position they get to at the end of the 10th. Emlyn Williams, who wrote a book called Taffy Goes to War, which you can't flip and get because it was a private publication, but the British Library have got a copy. He says this, he says, during the battle, we subsisted on iron rations, a bag of inch square biscuits and a larger biscuit of concrete confection. Water was in short supply, and with a few companions, we limped into Mametz village where stood a water cart. It involved a traipse of over 2 miles each way. So 4 miles just to get a drink. The Germans, and we mentioned I was, next to hunger, thirst tormented us the most. There was no drinking water in Mametz Wood. Eric Bent of the Lear Infantry Regiment. And just so, you know, we understand again, you know, it's not all going on in there. Sergeant Lloyd, Thomas Jones Lloyd, A Battery, 119th Brigade Royal Field Artillery. He's from Woodfield Terrace in Trehavard. He gets killed on the 12th of July by German counter-battery fire. As they after the engagement and they're laying fire down on the German lines. He's married to Katie with children, 4 children. He's in Gordon Dump Cemetery, and the inscription on his headstone reads, "Not forgotten by wife and children." If you want to find people making notes, Dr. Jonathan Hicks has written a book on Mametz, which covers, it's less about the action and more about the people. So there's really good stuff in there about individuals from all over Wales. If you want Dr. Jonathan Hicks, not the novel. Don't go with the novel. Oh, there he is. T.J. Lloyd, Royal Field Artillery, up in Gordon Dump. Okay. So in the morning of the 11th of July, I'll rattle through this as quickly as I can now. 5 o'clock in the morning, 10th South Wales Borders and 11th, they get into the Hammerhead and drive the Germans out. So they finally capture the Hammerhead. So not a great problem there. We've got Flatiron Copse, but the Germans are moving back. Horatio Evans is given command of the wood by Watts. Watts believes and tells Evans that the wood is captured. When he gets down there, he realises that they might have these sort of nicely looking, like, it's utter chaos. It hasn't been captured. They haven't got to the northern end. So he starts to reorganise his troops. As he's doing so and he's moving through the wood, an British artillery shell explodes over him and his party. 8 of his riflemen that are with him protecting him are killed. He's wounded. Llewellyn Griffiths gets hit as well because he's with him. So we're being shelled by our own side. 11 o'clock, Watts is going, attack, attack, attack. I want you to attack. He's obviously getting pressure now from home. Evans basically ignores that and decides, I'm going to get all my ducks in a line. And his plan is that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he is going to order without a barrage, so the Germans don't know they're coming, because there's always a bit of a clue in the First World War. If there's a barrage, you know there's an attack coming. You know, it's not rocket science. So without a barrage, he is ordering a bayonet attack across the whole to reach the edge of the wood. And he sends a message back to Watts with one of Watts' staff officers. I don't want a barrage, and this is what I'm doing. 15 minutes before the attack, British artillery barrage falls on the British troops. So they're just getting psyched up with 15 minutes to go out of their foxholes to attack the Germans at bayonet point, hand-to-hand fighting, and the bloody British artillery drop a load of shells on them. You can imagine that their morale is somewhat fractured at that point. Nevertheless, at 3:30, the whistles go, blow, and they go again. And they go to the edges of the wood, and they get within 20, 30 yards of the edge of the wood, and yet again, they are driven back by the machine gun fire and by the artillery from the German lines up here. And the reality is they basically have to withdraw to those start lines and dig in again and await another night in the wood. And just again, I mention Thomas Hardwidge from Ferndale and his brother Henry. They're with the 15th Welsh, the Carmarthenshire Battalion. They're killed on the 11th, and they're with the Tregaskis brothers in Flatiron Copse. And the Ron the leader wrote, Corporal Tom Hardwidge, the eldest of the two, was wounded by a sniper's bullet. Henry went to his assistance, and whilst giving him water was himself killed by a sniper's bullet, both dying in each other's arms. Private Noyes, John Noyes, son of John and Mary Noyes of Taft Street, Pontypridd. His father ran a fruit and veg in the middle of town. He has no known grave. He's remembered on the T-Pole Memorial. He attended the county school for boys. He was in the 20th Welsh, joined the 15th Welsh in France, and worked in the Guardian's office at the Pontypridd workhouse before the war. He's killed. Yeah. So they dig in for another night in the wood, and as getting up towards midnight, elements of 21st Division, Northumberland Fusiliers and others come into the wood. This lot down at the south here, they are pulled out quite early, and these start to be relieved and drop back. I think it's the 10th South Wales Borders are last out at 5:30 on the morning of the 12th. And they march away. They literally have to march between 5 and 15 miles to get to their new billets. That's what they were aiming for. That's the second line, and that's where the attack on Byzantine Ridge is due to come in on the 14th. Rawlinson. I only write a line to say how splendidly our troops have done. Only one division, the 38th Welshmen, turned out badly, and if it had not been for their failure at Mametz Wood, we would have brought off the action today, that's the Byzantine Ridge, at least 48 hours sooner. Rawlinson letter to the Chief of the General Staff, William Roberts, changed his tune very, very quickly. And this is the start of putting the blame on the 38th Welsh Division for the failure of Rawlinson's, what's the word I'm looking for, innovative attack, because he had men lying out in the dark before the attack on the Byzantine Ridge. This was the one that was going to break through. The fact that they couldn't take Highwood is another issue. It took them 3 months to take Highwood. The Welsh Division took Mametz Wood, and that is what was ignored by the British High Command. And as I said, it's not the first time he tried to blame people. He got on the wrong side of Sir John French when he did. But the media were not so down. You can see there, coming on with charge of the Welsh Division. Nothing, he says, could surpass the courage and determination displayed by the young Welshmen and the memorable charge which culminated in the driving back of the enemy. We had accomplished more successfully than had ever been anticipated the task which had been entrusted to us. The attack on Mametz Wood was one of the most difficult enterprises which fell to any division. It was left to the Welsh Division, and they swept the enemy out of it. From end to end, there's not a living German in the wood now. So get that. That changes. The press perspective starts to change next week. And this is where the title of this presentation comes from. The measure of our condition was the measure of the price paid for Mametz Wood. The largest of the woods in the Somme battlefield had reduced a strong division to a shadow. In the capture of this obstacle to our advancing line, we had discharged our immediate task, only to be ourselves flung aside as of little worth. And as I said, the rumours of them bolting, of them running away, were suddenly going through the British Expeditionary Force. There's a book called The War the Infantry Knew by Dunn, who was a medical officer in one of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, not in the 38th. And he talks about that in his book, in his memoir, about this, and that became and started to fester until Colin Hughes wrote his book in 1980. Talking of Christopher Williams, that's another Christopher Williams picture. Supposed to be hanging in the National Museum of Wales in Cardiff. It's in a box somewhere. I've been down there. I've tried to launch a petition, but they don't want to put it up. He went over to France. He was commissioned by Lloyd George. He went to France in the September, October of 1916. He was given access to men who fought at Mametz Wood, and he used his sketches for these men that are on here. He was actually captured by, he was wearing a British greatcoat, and he was captured by British soldiers. And they thought he was a German spy. But he eventually managed to talk his way out of it, and when he got back to Britain, he was talking to the official war artist. He said, he told me the story, he said, "You were bloody lucky," he said, "they should have shot you." But he was, from my stake, pacifist, but he painted Lloyd George before. But this, the outcome, 46 officers and 556 other ranks killed, 138 officers and 268 other ranks wounded, 6 officers and 579 missing, so a total of 109. So basically 4,000 men of the Welsh division were either killed, wounded or missing. Have I got that on there? Figures for German losses are estimated at in excess of 9,000. So they attacked a defended position. They took that defended position. They drove some of the most experienced and battle-hardened troops of the Kaiser's army out of that wood. And there's a little quote here from a guy called H. Perry Robinson, who was a newspaper man, but he wrote in his book, The Turning Point, January 1917, so literally 6 months after this, "So strong was the wood held to be that I know that there were those who at the beginning of these operations considered that we could never carry it directly, but should have to content ourselves with working round it and keeping it masked until we could isolate it." That's how difficult that job was. They accomplished it, and yet they were still denigrated afterwards. There's Tipval, and I put that up for my wife. There's Sam McConnell there, 16th Welsh. I think that's it. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry I've run on and rambled on a little bit. If you've got any questions, I should have said at the beginning if you stick your hand up, but thank you for your forbearance.